I texted the family group chat. I'm getting an award tonight. It would mean the world if you showed up. My brother said, we're heading to a concert instead. My mom added, stop guilt-tripping us. I simply replied, okay. That night, what they witnessed on live TV left them speechless. Have you ever felt so invisible, so utterly dismissed by the people who should love you most, that it felt like a physical ache? I lived that every single day. But on the biggest night of my life, the universe decided it was time for a very public, very shocking dose of comeuppance for them, whether they liked it or not. My name's Leo, I'm 27, and for as long as I can remember, I was the background character in my own family story. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who never caused trouble, but also never seemed to deserve any recognition. My parents and my younger brother, Marcus, had this way of orbiting each other, loud, demanding, constantly expecting me to just accept whatever role they assigned me. I used to tell myself I didn't mind, that being overlooked meant I could avoid the drama. But the truth? Being invisible in your own home eats away at you until it's all you can think about. Marcus was always the golden child. He's 2 years younger, but from the moment he kicked a soccer ball, he was the star. My parents went to every one of his games, screamed from the sidelines, hosted parties for his achievements. When I came home with good grades, they'd nod and say, that's expected. When Marcus scored 1 goal, even if his team lost, it was like a national holiday. Birthdays were the same. His would be a parade of balloons, cakes, expensive gifts. Mine? Usually dinner at home, and maybe a sweater I didn't want. It wasn't the lack of things that hurt. It was the message. My efforts were ordinary, his were extraordinary. I tried to play it off, tried to be supportive. I didn't want to be the jealous brother. But inside, I carried this quiet ache every time they brushed me aside. Still, I kept pushing myself. Through college, through internships, through sleepless nights working on projects no one in my family ever asked about. While Marcus partied his way through university, I was grinding. And even though they didn't see it, I knew deep down that one day it would matter. That day came when I got nominated for a major award in my field. This wasn't some small recognition. This was the kind of award that could genuinely change the trajectory of my career. Months of hard work, late nights, sacrifices, it had all led to this. For once, something big had my name on it, and I desperately wanted my family to be there. Against my better judgment, I reached for my phone and typed a message into the family group chat. I'm receiving an award tonight. It would mean a lot if you came. I hesitated before pressing send. Part of me already knew how this might play out, but still, I hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. It was Marcus. We're going to a concert instead, he wrote. Just like that. No hesitation, no consideration, not even a question about what kind of award it was. A concert. Some band he probably wouldn't even remember in a month. Before I could even process the sting of that, my mom chimed in. Don't guilt us, she typed, like my request was some kind of burdensome imposition. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I felt this wave of heat crawl up my neck. I wanted to scream, to demand why it was always like this, why I never mattered. But instead, I just typed back 2 words, all right? And I meant it. But not in the way they thought. Not in the way that meant I'd accept being sidelined again. Something inside me shifted in that moment. I wasn't a kid anymore, waiting for their approval. I wasn't desperate for their claps or their cheers. That night, I would stand in front of a crowd that actually saw me, that actually valued what I'd built. And my family? They'd be exactly where they chose to be. What none of them knew was that this awards ceremony wasn't some quiet, backroom event. It was going to be broadcast live, not just streamed online, but televised. Cameras, interviews, the works. My name would be announced, my face on the screen, my story told. And when it happened, when the spotlight finally found me, the people who had spent years making me feel invisible would have no choice but to see me, alongside everyone else watching. Before that moment arrived, I had to sit with the familiar ache of disappointment. I remember pacing my small apartment that afternoon, rehearsing what I'd say if they asked later why I didn't push harder for them to come. Should I guilt them back? Should I explain how much it meant to me? Or should I just let the silence do the talking? My mind spun in circles. And yet, beneath it all, there was this strange calm, like I was standing on the edge of something bigger than the years of neglect behind me. The award was one thing, but the real shift was happening inside me. For once, I wasn't just enduring their absence. I was letting it fuel me. Every dismissive comment, every ignored milestone, every shrug at my success, it was all building to this. And even though they had no idea I was already writing the next chapter in our family story, that evening, as I slipped on the suit I'd bought months earlier with money I'd saved, my phone buzzed again. Marcus had sent a picture, him and his friends grinning outside the concert venue, holding drinks. His caption read, "Best night ever." Mom liked the message with a heart. Dad replied, "Enjoy it. You deserve it." My hand tightened around the phone. Deserve. That word echoed in my head. All my life, it seemed like Marcus deserved everything, and I was supposed to just nod along. I set the phone down, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. I didn't know it yet, but by the end of that night, the image on their screens would leave them speechless in a way they'd never been before. I sat in the back of the cab on the way to the ceremony, staring out at the city lights blurring past the window. The world outside seemed alive, buzzing with energy, like it was in sync with me for once. But inside, I felt heavy. The image of that group chat kept flashing in my mind. Marcus laughing at his concert, Mom cheering him on, Dad chiming in with words he hadn't used for me in years. That word, deserve, echoed over and over like a drum beat I couldn't escape. It wasn't new. It wasn't even surprising. If I'm honest, I'd seen it coming since childhood. My parents had this way of measuring everything I did against Marcus, and somehow I always came up short. When I got a scholarship for college, they said, "That's great, Leo, but don't brag. Your brother is still figuring things out." When Marcus got into a local league team, they treated him like he'd just signed with Barcelona. I still remember a Christmas years ago. I'd saved up my allowance and part-time job money to buy Dad a nice watch, something I knew he'd been eyeing. When he opened it, he smiled politely, said, "Thanks, son," and set it aside. Later that night, Marcus gave him a cheap keychain from a gas station with a soccer ball charm. And Dad laughed, clipped it onto his keys, and said, "Now this is special." Everyone clapped and teased Marcus for being thoughtful. I sat there quietly, holding back the sting in my throat. The pattern only got worse as we got older. Marcus wrecked his car once after a night out. My parents rushed to comfort him, bought him a newer model, and said, "Don't be too hard on yourself. Mistakes happen." When my car broke down from wear and tear because I couldn't afford a replacement, Dad shook his head and said, "You should have planned better, Leo." No sympathy, no help, just disappointment. And yet, I kept hoping that one day they'd see me. That one day they'd sit in the audience clapping until their hands stung, smiling like they were proud of me. That's why the award mattered. It wasn't just recognition from strangers. It was proof that my life, my choices, and my hard work had value. Proof that I wasn't the shadow they made me out to be. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized they didn't want to see it. It wasn't that they couldn't. It was that they wouldn't. Marcus's glow was easier to bask in. He was loud, charismatic, messy in a way they could excuse. I was quiet, steady, a reminder of responsibility they didn't want to acknowledge. That week leading up to the ceremony, I tried to test the waters. I mentioned the nomination to Mom on the phone. She hummed distractedly, then asked if I'd seen Marcus's new haircut. I told Dad the award was from one of the biggest organizations in my field. He nodded and said, "That's good, but have you thought about maybe moving back closer to home? Marcus could use your help with some bills." It was like every conversation found its way back to him. The final straw before the ceremony was when I visited home a month earlier. I hadn't been in a while, and I thought maybe we'd sit down and talk. Instead, I walked into the living room to find the mantel covered in Marcus's trophies, medals, framed photos, soccer tournaments, birthdays, random milestones. My own graduation photo wasn't there anymore. I asked Mom about it, and she just said, "Oh, we had to make room. It's in the drawer." The drawer. Like my entire existence could be tucked away, forgotten. So, when I saw their responses in the group chat that night, I realized I had been clinging to a fantasy. They weren't coming. They never would. The ceremony wasn't for them. It was for me. And yet, some bitter part of me wanted them to see. Not just hear about it later. Not just brush it off when I mentioned it months down the road. But see it. Live. With no way to escape. The cab pulled up to the venue, and I stepped out into a wash of light and noise. Reporters stood by the doors, cameras flashing as nominees walked the carpet. My stomach nodded. This was real. This was my moment. As I walked forward, adjusting my tie, I could almost hear Marcus's voice mocking me, "Don't guilt us." I could hear Mom saying, "We're busy." And beneath it all, Dad's word, deserve. That word didn't sting anymore. Not in the same way, because tonight I'd prove exactly what I deserved. But the rising tension wasn't just about them not showing up. something else was stirring inside me. A mix of anger, pride, and a quiet plan forming in the back of my mind. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I wasn't going to let this be just another moment they ignored. This time, they wouldn't get to look away. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect, because what I didn't know until I arrived was that the organizers had a surprise in store. The awards ceremony wasn't just being broadcast on local TV. It was airing nationally. My name, my face, my story, all of it was about to be spotlighted far beyond what I'd imagined. I smiled to myself, though the ache in my chest was still there. For years, I'd been pushed aside, minimized, treated like I didn't matter. Tonight, all of that would change. Not because they wanted it to, but because they wouldn't have a choice. And as I stood in line waiting to check in, I pulled out my phone one more time. I stared at the family group chat, at Marcus's photo from the concert, at Mom's heart reaction, at Dad's words. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to send them one last message, a final chance, something simple like, it's being televised. But then I stopped. No, let them find out the way the rest of the country would. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, straightened my shoulders, and walked inside. The ceremony had this surreal energy, almost dreamlike. I'd been to events before, but nothing like this. Cameras sweeping across the crowd, flashes of light, people in sharp suits and elegant dresses, everyone buzzing with anticipation. As I checked in, they handed me a small envelope with my seat number and a badge with my name on it in bold letters, Leo Harrison, nominee. I turned it over in my hands, letting the weight of it sink in. I should have felt pure excitement, but something gnawed at me. That gnawing turned into a sharp twist when I glanced at my phone again just before the ceremony started. The family group chat lit up with notifications. Marcus had posted a string of pictures from the concert. Him beaming with his arm around his friends, holding beers and plastic cups. Another photo of the stage lights. Another of him posing with some band member he probably begged for a selfie with. He captioned one, "Best night of my life." I scrolled further. Mom had commented, "So proud of you, sweetheart," followed by clapping emojis. Dad added, "You earned this, son." Nothing like making memories. That was the moment. That was the knife. Not just the fact that they didn't show up for me, but that they were celebrating Marcus's night like it was some grand accomplishment. I sat there in my tailored suit, with months of effort about to culminate in one of the most important nights of my life, and my own parents couldn't be bothered to notice. Worse, they were spending their words of pride on him, on a random concert, on something fleeting. My chest tightened. I thought back to every little slight, every moment I'd brushed off. My graduation picture stuffed in a drawer. The cheap keychain treated like a treasure while my carefully chosen gift was ignored. The time I told Dad I'd landed my first job out of college, and he barely looked up from the TV before asking if Marcus needed help with rent. I'd swallowed all of it quietly because I thought maybe someday it would be different. But staring at those messages, I realized the truth. It was never going to be different. The betrayal wasn't just in their absence. It was in the way they made it clear that no matter what I did, I'd never be enough. Not compared to him. They didn't just overlook me. They actively chose to invest their pride, their love, their words of encouragement somewhere else. And this wasn't childhood anymore. I wasn't a kid hoping for approval. I was a man sitting in a room filled with people who actually respected what I'd accomplished, while my family cheered from the sidelines of someone else's life. The ceremony began. Lights dimming, music swelling. My thoughts should have been on the stage, on the speeches, on the possibility of hearing my name called, but all I could see was that group chat. My brother's grin, my parents' applause. Not for me, but for him. I felt my hands tremble slightly as I set the phone face down on my leg. I took a breath, but it didn't calm me. The sting turned into a burn, and the burn into something sharper, my trust in them. What little I had left was gone. Something inside me shifted that night, hard and permanent. I wasn't just disappointed anymore. I was done. It was almost poetic in a cruel way. At the exact moment I was on the cusp of being seen by the world, the people who should have been my first and loudest cheerleaders proved once again that they never would be. The contrast was unbearable. It was like watching two versions of my life collide, the one where I was invisible at home, and the one where I was finally recognized outside of it. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the sight of my family showering Marcus with pride while I sat alone in that ballroom, was the breaking point. The emotional line I could never cross back over. From that point on, everything I did, everything I planned, everything that was about to unfold, it wasn't about winning them over anymore. It was about something else entirely. And as the announcer walked onto the stage, the cameras panning across the audience, I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the bright lights above. My jaw tightened, and I felt a strange calm wash over me. If they weren't going to see me by choice, then they'd see me by force. The ceremony unfolded like a dream, but inside, I was drowning. I sat there in a room filled with strangers, applauding speeches, the clink of glasses echoing, and I felt like I was split in two. On the outside, I smiled when the cameras panned past, clapped politely for other winners, and nodded at the conversations happening around me. On the inside, I was spiraling. When they called my name, yes, my name, I walked onto that stage and accepted the award with my hands steady and my voice clear, but I barely heard myself. I remember flashes, the blinding lights, the weight of the trophy in my hand, the crowd rising in a standing ovation. I must have said something coherent, because later people congratulated me on how inspiring my words had been. But in that moment, my mind was stuck somewhere else. It wasn't on the applause in front of me. It was on the silence behind me, the absence of the only people who should have been there. As I stood there holding that award, a piece of me broke off, like a rope finally snapping after years of strain. The little boy who wanted his parents to say, "We're proud of you," died quietly on that stage. The night ended in celebration. There were photos, interviews, new connections. Everyone around me was smiling, shaking my hand, telling me I had a bright future ahead. And yet, when I got back to my apartment, the walls felt colder than ever. I set the award on my desk and just stared at it. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like ashes in my mouth. I opened my phone. Of course, the family chat was still buzzing. Marcus had posted more concert videos, my parents gushing over them. Dad writing, "Wish we could do nights like this more often." I scrolled and scrolled, waiting to see even a passing mention of me. A question about how my night went. A simple, "good luck" message. There was nothing, not a word. I turned the phone face down, lay back on the couch, and just stared at the ceiling. My chest felt hollow, like all the air had been sucked out of me. It hit me then. I was on my own. Not just physically, but emotionally. They'd never be the family I wanted. That was my rock bottom. I didn't cry. Not that night. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something heavier, more resigned. The kind of silence that comes when you finally stop arguing with reality. And in that silence, something else stirred, something sharper. I thought back on all the times I had bent myself into knots trying to earn their approval. The late-night phone calls where I'd downplay my own achievements so Marcus wouldn't feel overshadowed. The weekends I'd spend helping Dad with chores around the house while Marcus went off to parties, only to be told later that your brother has so much on his plate, you should be more supportive. The birthdays, the graduations, the job offers, moments where I should have been celebrated but was always told to keep it down, not make things about me. It all replayed in my head like a cruel highlight reel. And then came the realization that shook me to my core. I had wasted years begging for scraps of validation that would never come. That was the moment the planning began. Not consciously at first, but quietly, like seeds being planted in the dark. I didn't think, how do I get revenge? Not yet. It started simpler. I thought, how do I step away? How do I build something so far beyond them that they can never touch it, never diminish it, never stuff it in a drawer? The answer wasn't immediate. It wasn't even clear. But the shift had started. I could feel it in the way I looked at the award on my desk. Not as a prize, but as a reminder. A reminder that I didn't need them to make me visible. That I was capable of being seen, whether they wanted to acknowledge it or not. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. Every family call I ignored, every group chat notification I silenced. It was like tearing muscle from bone. I'd been conditioned for years to chase their approval. And walking away felt unnatural, painful. But every time I reached for my phone to respond, I forced myself to stop. They didn't notice. Not really. Mom sent a few casual messages, mostly about Marcus's games. Dad forwarded articles he thought I'd find useful, never once asking about my work. Marcus filled the chat with photos of his nights out, new clothes, random jokes. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody mentioned the award. And in that void, in that suffocating silence, I started to build. I buried myself in work, not as an escape, but as fuel. I started taking meetings I'd been too hesitant to schedule before. I reached out to mentors I'd been shy about contacting. I said yes to opportunities that scared me. Every night I told myself, this is for me, not for them. But deep down, another voice whispered, one day they'll see. One day they won't be able to ignore you. That thought scared me at first because it sounded bitter, vengeful. But the more I sat with it, the more it felt like clarity. I wasn't plotting their downfall. Not then. But I was done protecting them from the truth. Done letting their neglect define me. Done pretending their favoritism didn't matter. And though I couldn't see the full picture yet, I knew one thing with certainty. When the moment came, I wouldn't let it pass quietly. The shift in me didn't happen overnight. It was subtle, almost invisible at first. But in the weeks and months after the award, I began to notice the changes stacking up like bricks. Each one forming a wall between the old me, the one who lived for scraps of recognition from my family, and the new me, who didn't need them anymore. It started with opportunities that came pouring in after the ceremony. The award had put my name in the spotlight, and suddenly doors that once felt bolted shut cracked open. Companies reached out. People I admired asked to collaborate, and mentors who barely noticed me before were calling me directly. At first, I felt like an imposter, like maybe I didn't belong in these conversations. But slowly, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to believe. I had earned all of it. I took on projects that terrified me. Projects I would have once avoided because I was afraid of failing and hearing my family say, "See, you're not cut out for this." But without their voices in my ear, I felt lighter. And when I succeeded, it wasn't just a win professionally. It was proof to myself that I didn't need their approval to be great. My life began to change in ways they couldn't imagine. I moved into a better apartment, one with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. I started dressing differently, sharper suits, clothes that reflected the man I was becoming instead of the quiet shadow I used to be. My confidence grew and people noticed. Strangers at networking events gravitated toward me. Colleagues looked to me for leadership, and even the mentors I once looked up to started treating me as an equal. Meanwhile, my family's world stayed exactly the same. Marcus was still the center of their attention, still posting photos of nights out and soccer games. Mom and Dad cheered him on with the same tired enthusiasm, as if his every move was groundbreaking. But from my new vantage point, it looked different. For the first time, I saw it clearly, not as a reflection of my inadequacy, but as a reflection of their limitations. They didn't know how to value anything outside of the easy, familiar glow Marcus provided. I stopped craving their attention, and in its place, I started to enjoy a new kind of power, invisibility by choice. They didn't ask about my life, so I didn't offer details. When Mom called, I kept the conversations polite but short. When Dad asked if I could help your brother out financially, because apparently Marcus was behind on rent again, I simply said, "I can't," and left it at that. For once, I didn't bend myself into knots trying to justify my boundaries. I didn't over-explain, didn't apologize. I just let the silence hang. They didn't push much. I think they assumed I was still quietly plodding along. The same dependable Leo who would always be there when they needed something. They had no idea how much had changed. And a part of me took a quiet satisfaction in that I was building something so much bigger than they could comprehend right under their noses. But success has a way of multiplying when you stop holding yourself back. Within a year, I wasn't just respected in my field. I was becoming a name people recognized. Invitations to speak at conferences rolled in. Articles were written about the work I was doing. I even got invited to sit on panels alongside people I'd once studied in school. Every time I saw my name in print, every time a microphone was handed to me, I felt the weight of years of invisibility lifting. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the applause faded and I was alone in my apartment, I couldn't help but think of them, not with longing anymore, but with a kind of detached curiosity. What would they say if they knew? Would they finally see me, or would they find a way to twist it to make it about Marcus somehow? The thought didn't hurt the way it used to. Now, it just fueled me. The turning point came when I was invited to a national event, bigger than the award ceremony, bigger than anything I'd done before, a televised gala celebrating innovators and leaders across different industries. When the invitation arrived, I held the embossed envelope in my hands and let out a laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like fate. I knew instantly that this was it. The kind of moment you can't hide from. The kind of spotlight that reaches even the most stubborn corners. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just going to step into that spotlight. I was going to own it. Still, I kept quiet. I didn't mention it to my family. I didn't hint at the scale of what was coming. Let them keep cheering Marcus on. Let them keep assuming I was just managing. When the night came, they'd find out along with everyone else. And that's when I realized I wasn't just rising. I was preparing. Slowly, quietly, I was setting the stage for something bigger than success. Something that went beyond proving myself. Because one day soon, they wouldn't just have to acknowledge me. They'd have to confront what they had done. The years they'd spent ignoring, dismissing, and underestimating me. And when that day came, I wasn't sure if I wanted their apology. What I wanted was for them to feel what I had felt. The sting of being invisible, the hollow ache of realizing you'd missed something monumental. The invitation to that national gala sat on my desk for weeks, its embossed lettering catching the light whenever I walked by. I'd glance at it casually, but inside I felt a hum of electricity every time I saw it. This wasn't just another award or speaking event. This was the kind of platform that could cement me in the public eye. A spotlight so wide and so bright that even people who had spent their entire lives refusing to look at me would have no choice but to see. But the real setup for what was to come didn't happen on the night of the gala itself. It began months earlier when the opportunities from my awards snowballed into something larger than I could have imagined. One of the companies I partnered with after my first big recognition was a media group, a powerful one with connections across TV, print, and online platforms. At first, it was just a collaboration. I'd contribute to their projects, provide expertise, and in return, they'd give me visibility. But as time went on, I realized they weren't just interested in what I could provide. They were interested in me. My story, my perspective, my ability to connect with an audience. It was a strange shift to go from being overlooked by my own family to suddenly being sought after by strangers with influence. I remember sitting in a glass-walled office one afternoon, the city stretching behind me, as one of the executives leaned forward and said, "Leo, people don't just respect your work. They relate to you. That's rare. Have you thought about what you could do with a bigger platform?" That sentence stuck with me. A bigger platform. Not just recognition within my field, but something beyond it. Something public, visible. And for the first time, I saw how all the years of being silenced and dismissed could actually become fuel. If I leaned into it, if I let the world hear the story I'd lived through, people might see themselves in me. Over the next few months, I started accepting interviews, podcasts, magazines, panels. At first, I kept my answers strictly professional, talking about my work, my projects, my goals. But slowly, I began to open up. I spoke about resilience, about being underestimated, about working in silence when no one believes in you. I didn't name my family, of course, but I didn't need to. The message resonated on its own. The response shocked me. People flooded my inbox with messages. I felt invisible, too. Thank you for saying what so many of us have lived. You gave me hope. It was humbling, but it was also clarifying. I wasn't just rising for myself anymore. My story, my survival in the shadows, was giving voice to others. And the more visible I became, the more powerful I felt. Meanwhile, my family remained oblivious. Calls were still about Marcus, his soccer league, his new girlfriend, his plans that never seemed to go anywhere. When Dad asked once if I was still at that same job, I almost laughed. He had no idea that I'd been promoted twice or that my name had appeared in major publications. Mom complained that I didn't visit enough, that Marcus missed me. Every conversation was a rerun of the same script. Their world too small to notice the one I was quietly building outside of them. And I let them stay blind. I didn't correct them, didn't brag, didn't hint. The silence became my weapon. Then came the meeting that changed everything. The organizers of the National Gala invited me not only to attend, but to receive a special recognition, a Lifetime Achievement Award, despite my age, for the groundbreaking work I'd done in my field. I nearly laughed when I read the email. Lifetime achievement? At 27, the scale of it was absurd, but it was real, and it was going to be broadcast live across the country. When I walked into the planning session for the gala, I expected to discuss logistics, time slots, speeches, wardrobe. What I didn't expect was for the director to lean across the table and say, "We'd like to feature your story as part of the televised broadcast. Not just your work, but your journey. We think people need to hear it." My chest tightened. For a moment, I pictured Marcus, my parents, sitting at home, maybe flipping through channels and stumbling across me on their TV screens. Hearing my story, not as a family member they could dismiss, but as a narrative presented to the entire nation. I agreed, of course. But inside, I realized what this meant. The setup was complete. All the years of being minimized, all the invisible wounds, all the swallowed words, they were about to be spoken aloud, framed in a way that no one could ignore. The irony was almost too sharp. My family had accused me of guilting them for asking to be seen. Now, they were going to hear my truth whether they wanted to or not. Delivered not in a private plea they could brush off, but in a broadcast they couldn't escape. And though I didn't know exactly how they'd react, I knew one thing for certain. By the end of that night, the balance of power between us would never be the same. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of weight that presses against your ribs. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was dressing up to impress anyone. Not my parents, not Marcus, not even the audience I was about to face. I was doing this for me. And in a way, for that younger version of me who had sat silently at dinner tables while everyone else praised Marcus's latest achievement. The venue was dazzling, a cathedral of lights and velvet. Cameras perched like hawks, waiting to swoop. As I walked the red carpet, reporters leaned forward with their microphones, calling my name. I answered calmly, confidently, never once letting on that my mind was somewhere else, half on the stage I was about to step onto, half on the living room I imagined back home. I could see it in my mind, the TV flickering, my parents settling onto the couch after their long day, Marcus sprawled with his phone in hand, all of them expecting another ordinary evening. And then my face would fill the screen. The program unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Speeches, performances, applause in all the right places. I waited, each minute ratcheting up the tension inside me. When my category finally came, the announcer's voice boomed across the hall, recounting my achievements, my projects, my rise from obscurity. I could feel the cameras lock onto me, the heat of the lights pressing against my skin. My heart raced, but not from nerves, from anticipation. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer concluded, please welcome tonight's honoree, Leo Harrison. The applause rose like a wave as I stepped onto the stage. My shoes clicked against the polished floor, each step heavier than the last, like I was walking not just into the spotlight, but into a reckoning. The host handed me the award, sleek and gleaming. I shook his hand, smiled, and turned to face the crowd. 1,000 eyes looked up at me, millions more through the cameras. Somewhere among them, maybe at that exact moment, were the three faces I'd spent a lifetime waiting to see. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was steady. Thank you, I began, pausing to let the room settle. This award means more to me than recognition of my work. It represents something deeper, what it means to be seen. Truly seen, after years of being invisible. A hush fell. My words weren't technical. No word about my field. They were personal, deliberate. I grew up in a family where attention was selective, where achievements were compared, measured, and often dismissed. For years, I believed I wasn't enough. That no matter how hard I worked, it would never be worthy of applause. I thought invisibility was my fate. I let that hang in the air. I didn't name Marcus, didn't mention my parents directly, but the weight of my story filled the room. But invisibility, I continued, can be a powerful teacher. It forces you to work in silence, to grow roots deep enough to hold when no one is watching. It teaches you resilience. And when the moment comes, when the light finally does find you, you're ready to stand tall in it. The crowd shifted, some nodded, others leaned forward. I could feel them connecting. I stand here tonight not just because of what I've done, but because of what I've endured. To anyone who has ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told they didn't deserve to be seen, I want you to know, you do. You always did. And your moment will come. Applause broke out, swelling like thunder. Cameras flashed, but in my mind, I wasn't hearing the audience in front of me. I was picturing the silence back home, the stunned expressions, the tightening jaws, the realization that the son and brother they'd ignored was now speaking not just to them, but to an entire nation. The speech wasn't about revenge in the loud, vengeful sense. It was calm, measured, almost tender, but that's what made it sting sharper. I hadn't lashed out. I hadn't begged. I had simply laid out the truth they had spent years denying, and delivered it in a way that millions of others applauded. As I stepped off the stage, award in hand, I knew the execution was complete. The revenge wasn't in humiliating them directly. It was in making sure that when they looked at that screen, they couldn't escape the reality. I had risen without them, above them, beyond them, and they had missed it. The night after the gala, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in, colleagues, mentors, even strangers who had watched the broadcast. People told me my words had moved them, that they saw themselves in my story. Some called me brave, others just said, thank you. For the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of being visible. And it wasn't just recognition, it was resonance. But among the dozens of glowing notifications, 3 stood out. The family group chat. At first, it was silent. I imagined the shock that must have rippled through their living room when my face appeared on national TV speaking truths they'd spent years ignoring. Then finally, a message appeared from Mom. Leo, why didn't you tell us it was such a big event? I stared at it, letting the words sink in. Not, "We're proud of you." Not, "We're sorry we missed it." Just the same deflection, the same refusal to take responsibility, as if the burden was on me for not forcing them to care. A second message followed, this time from Dad. "You made us sound like terrible parents on live television. Do you realize what people will think?" I let out a laugh. Not bitter, not angry, just a small, disbelieving laugh. Even now, their first instinct was to worry about appearances, about how they were seen, not about what they had done. Then Marcus chimed in. "Wow, bro. A little dramatic, don't you think? You made it sound like we ignored you your whole life. Chill. It's not that deep." That was the moment. The final nail. I felt a clarity wash over me so sharp, it was almost peaceful. They hadn't changed. They never would. And I didn't need them to. I didn't reply to the group chat. Instead, I typed 3 separate messages. To Mom, "I spent years begging to be noticed. Last night, I finally was. You had your chance." To Dad, "You're right. People will think you were terrible parents. That's because you were." And to Marcus, it was that deep. It always was. You just never had to feel it. Then I muted the chat and set the phone down. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt or longing or anger. I just felt free. Word spread quickly after the gala. Relatives who'd barely spoken to me before reached out, congratulating me, telling me how proud they were. Old teachers emailed, saying they'd watched me on TV and remembered the quiet kid who sat in the back of the classroom. Even neighbors sent notes, saying they had no idea I'd accomplished so much. My parents, they couldn't escape it. Their friends saw the broadcast. Their coworkers mentioned it. Even people at church brought it up. Everywhere they turned, their son was visible, undeniable. The son they dismissed had become the story they couldn't avoid. In the weeks that followed, they tried to mend a rift. Mom called, leaving voicemails laced with forced cheer. Dad sent long texts about misunderstandings. Marcus predictably made a joke of it, saying I'd overplayed the neglect, but the difference now was simple. I didn't answer. Not with silence born of defeat, but with silence born of choice. My life surged forward. New projects, new platforms, new horizons, and every success only widened the gap. The more the world applauded me, the smaller their excuses sounded. One evening, months later, I walked into my apartment after another event and set down a second award on the shelf beside the first. The city lights shimmered through my window, reflecting off the trophies, bathing the room in gold. For a moment, I thought of that drawer at home, the one where Mom had stuffed my graduation photo to make space for Marcus's trophies. I smiled. My achievements weren't in a drawer anymore. They were out in the open, on display for anyone to see. And the people who had once shoved me into the shadows, they were left blinking in the light, too late to shield their eyes. That was my revenge. Not shouting, not vengeance in the traditional sense, but living so fully, so visibly, that their years of neglect became their legacy, not mine. I poured myself a glass of wine, stood by the window, and let the quiet of the city night settle around me. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone to clap. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where you realized the people who should have supported you most were actually holding you back? How did you break free? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.